Hey everybody, good morning and welcome to Mount Moriah's Kids Church. I'm Josh and I'm excited to be here with you today. I don't have Maddie because we are pre-recording today's session actually last night, which is really tonight, but for you it was last night. Is that confusing when you're watching it? But know this, that it is broadcasting for the first time here on our Facebook page at 10:25 a.m. on Sunday morning, and we'll be taking a look at the comments. You can always chat in and say hello and tell us exactly where you're watching from. So I know some of you will be in the sanctuary watching this, others at home. Regardless of where you're watching, I know this, I'm in my kitchen today. All right. And so that means we have a little bit of an experiment that we're going to go through today that I'm going to talk to you about. And this is our lesson, our next lesson in our series on different foods. Why? Because when we start thinking about Thanksgiving, not only do we think about what we are thankful for, but we start thinking about good meals and eating. At least I know I do. And so last week we talked about, let's see, what was it? We talked about stuffing, right? And we talked about whether there was wheat and stuffing and bread and yams and all different types of food. We did that little quiz because our lesson was all about the wheat and the weeds, or that funny word that we heard about in the Bible called tares. And so if you remember last week's lesson, it was a parable, right? And Jesus was teaching this, which is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. And he was teaching about something called, that he referred to as the harvest. Right? If you remember, there was a good seed that was sown in the field, which was the wheat, which is good for making food and eating and what the farmer was trying to grow. But then the enemy came in and sowed some weeds. Bad news, right? And so when the workers went out to work the field, they both were growing and they said, what should we do to the field owner? Should we try to pick out the weeds? And he said, no, let them be there for now until the time of harvest, because we will be able to clearly tell the difference. And I'm wondering if you remember how to tell the difference. And so as we look at this slide from last week, there it is, right? We learned that the one right here on the left is the wheat and the one on the right is the weed. And that's pretty easy to see after they are in full harvest. Why? Because the image on the right shows that the wheat has a little heavier seed and it actually starts to bend over because of the weight and looks like it's almost bowing down, which I think is pretty cool. So the point of that story, again, is that to give us some understanding on why evil exists in the world. And God tells us that there will be evil in the world, there will be bad things, but don't worry, God knows his children. He can recognize his children. And when we place our faith in Jesus, he counts us as his child. And when Jesus comes back, he'll have no problem identifying us and who we are to take him to be with him in his presence, which is super exciting. So that was last week. This week is another food that maybe you'll be eating around Thanksgiving, right? We're going to use eggs in our experiment today. So I like eggs. Wonder how you guys like eggs the best. Type in how you like to eat your eggs the best. Do you like, what do they call them? Pickled eggs. It's one of my favorite ways to eat an egg. Do you like scrambled eggs? I eat my scrambled eggs with ketchup. I know some people think that's weird, but I love it. Some people eat it with hot sauce or salsa. And so how do you like to eat your eggs? So we're just going to use that in the experiment. And then we're also going to talk about this concept called preserving. And I know that's a big word, but when you preserve something, when you preserve a meat, typically you sprinkle salt on it to preserve it. And preserve means to make something last longer. So if you have meat, often it will be preserved with salt, so it lasts longer before you cook it, and it stays good. And you know what salt also does? It adds a lot of flavor to different things we eat. So I know I like to eat salt on my vegetables. I like to put a lot of it when I'm eating broccoli or green beans or something like that. And so a lot of people eat salt on nearly anything to add more flavor. And so today's lesson, we're going to use the eggs as an experiment. It's not necessarily talking about eggs in our Bible story, but it is talking about salt and it's talking about light. And so today's lesson is all about us being the salt of the earth, as Jesus tells us in this story from Matthew chapter 5, and it starts on verse 13. So let me get our slides up here so I can walk through. I get big pictures for you here today, and make sure I'm on the right one, because that's always helpful to start at the beginning. And I'll share my screen. And let me read this to you. It's about 7 or 8 slides. So pay attention to the story, and then we'll get into our experiment here. So we see that it starts with Jesus teaching a large crowd on the hills of Galilee. So you can see the image here of a large crowd gather around and Jesus teaching. The next slide says, Jesus said to them, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot." I guess that's a fair statement, right? If you had salt, but it really doesn't have the taste of saltiness, it's not going to be very effective for adding flavor to your food or preserving your food. So Jesus is telling the people, you are the salt of the earth. He's actually telling me, and you, as his followers, you are the salt of the earth. And we'll learn about what that means. But before we do that, I want to make sure we understand the light part of this story, because he also tells us, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill that cannot be hidden. People don't light a lamp and put it under a bowl. That would be kind of silly, right? To light a lamp and put it under a bowl like a candle. It wouldn't, it would probably go out. You wouldn't see much of the light. Instead, what do? They put a lamp on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others. Remember, Jesus is teaching this to the crowd and to us as his followers. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. All right, so that is our story. And so we need to ask ourselves, well, what does it mean to be light, and what does it mean to be salt? And we've learned about being light before. You guys have probably sang the song. Maybe you've done the motions of This Little Light of Mine, and we've taught about it in kids' church at least a couple times. And what that really means is that once we have Jesus in our heart, his Spirit comes to live inside of us once we place our faith in Jesus, and we have this ability to shine the light to other people, to share the good news about Jesus, to tell them, not only tell them about Jesus, but show them about Jesus by how we love God and how we love others. And we can do that through our good deeds. And you can probably, it wouldn't be a bad idea to come up with a list of ways that you can show others about Jesus. And that would be a good example of being the light of the world, being a great example in pointing others to Christ and making a life where you are following Christ look very attractive, because it is. So just being faithful to that calling that we have. Now, this concept about salt, we don't talk about that part too much. And so that's why I want to talk about that today. We said it adds flavor. It's a preservative. And so what does it mean to be the salt of the earth? Well, that's where our experiment comes in. So I have some salt, as you've seen. I have an egg, which is going to be our earth today. And I have 2 cups of water. 1 cup is just normal water from the sink. There is nothing added to it, right? My other cup is water from the sink. You can see it's a little bit cloudier because I've went ahead before the video and I've added salt to that water. I'll even sprinkle a little bit more in to show you, added some salt to that water. So when we think about the earth without God's people in it, without Jesus in it, without the light of Jesus in it, it's a pretty grim, a pretty gloomy picture. And so here we go. I'm going to take the egg, which is our earth, right? I'm going to drop it into the cup of water, and you'll see, I'm going to do it softly, right? Because I don't want it to crack. You can see that egg sinks all the way to the bottom. So this is a picture of the world without Jesus. It's just doomed. And honestly, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of evil in the world, as we learned last week. Now, I can't reach that, so I'll take my spoon and grab it out here. And we'll dry off my egg just a little bit. And now let's go ahead and grab the other cup. Okay, and so this is an example of life with Jesus's followers in it, living in a way that shines our light for others, that really follows Jesus and obeys his word. And so I've added salt to this cup, right? We're the salt of the earth. So I went ahead and sprinkled it in that cup, and watch what happens to the world. All right, so you can see it's not so doomed. It's floating, right? And so the example here that I want you to think about, it's just a little cool science trick, is that by adding salt here, it increased the density of the water, made the egg float. That's the technical thing that's happening here. But what we're seeing here is a good picture of us as Christians when we're following Jesus, preserving the world and what we're supposed to be doing, helping to keep it afloat, so to speak, through our actions and what we do. And so Jesus teaches us not only to be light, but to be salt. And so I want you to think about that as we go throughout the week on how we can be salt. How can we help others? How can we take areas where there is evil in the world, and how can we shine a light there and be a good example? So that's something I want you to think about. And I have a great Bible verse this week that I just love, and it'll give us a great thing to remember as we head into Thanksgiving here in just, I think, 4 days or so. So today's memory verse, if you want to read it with me: "And whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him." And so it says, whatever you do in word, whether it's something you're saying or deed, which means something you're doing, do it in such a way where it's for God. It's in the name of Jesus, and give God the glory. Give him thanks for all that he has given to us. And certainly a good lesson to remember this week as we head into the Thanksgiving season. We do have a ton to be thankful for. And let's make sure that we are doing our part to tell others about Jesus and being the salt of the earth. So hopefully you guys have a great Thanksgiving. Enjoy some food, maybe some eggs, right? And thanks so much for joining us here on Kids Church. Stick around, because Mount Moriah Praise and Worship will be broadcasting live here in just a few minutes.